What we got next? What we got next?
Hey, before we
Go
get
ahead,
into
go
the
ahead.
next one, Canelo versus who, man? Hey, man, bottom corner, you could have an advertisement there. All you gotta do is hit us up
My
at
feet smell like butt at gmail.com.
man greatest email account
Ever.
ever.
Ever. Now listen.
Hey, man, Canelo versus who,
Who?
man? Reason why we say that, man, because the last fight that Canelo was in, he dominated, but he dominated an opponent that he was supposed to dominate in a fight that was that had to happen.
Yes. And
So, Shine,
that's
talk about that situation, man, because I don't think a lot of people understand the immediate title defense that Canelo had to do, man. Hey, man, talk about it a little bit.
so here's the thing. Uh Everybody online, because I'm always online scouring the forums because I like to read. I like to read and then guess what the word was that people say. And everybody's like, he's cherry picking. He's taking easy fights. He's doing this, that, and the other. And a lot of the times with a lot of the champions, when you don't see this and they're just fighting people, other things are happening behind the scenes. So what this was known as is a mandatory. Boxing is mandatory. There are four sanctioning bodies, and I'm pretty sure all four of them have mandatories. And so he has to fight this guy, or he loses that belt. And there's other things that you could do. There's step aside money. You know, there's the fact that you could tell him, hey, man, I'm going to take this fight because this fight is a bigger fight. But I will pay you this amount of money to step aside and fight somebody else, and we'll be good. Heh. Some people take that if, they're completely outclassed. Some people take their mandatory because that's going to be their payday.
Man, I would take it.
But
I would take that little 2-3 million myself. But go
but
ahead.
you got two things. You got two people fighting an eliminator for a sanctioning body that says, hey, you will be the number one contender. And then when you are the number one contender, guess what? You have to fight the champion. He has to fight you in his next fight or he will vacate the belt. Canelo likes belts. So when they said, hey, here's a mandatory, he was like, I'll do it. But Canelo in this mandatory, I had figured out he had another mandatory that actually never came to fruition because we would have been talking about that fight. And that was one of the Charlo brothers. One time was a number one contender and was a mandatory. So there are ways around it, you know. So if you say maybe he's not taking the fights that you want, but my question is, then who beats him? Who you
Man,
got? Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders is maybe the next two fights, but is that at the weight class? Is that at 160? Let me figure that out. I'm gonna look that up.
that's not what we want to see.
But okay, but what do we want to see? Earl
Man, we want to
Spence,
see big fights, man. We want to see big fights. We want to see big names, and we want to see big pay-per-views. And
Spence
we want to
Canelo.
see Canelo versus Spence, man. That's what we want to see. We want to see hands be thrown that have been thrown before, but have not been knocked down that many
Now,
times. We want to see Canelo versus Spence
I think we
next,
have a
but we
problem.
ain't gonna
No, it
see
ain't gonna
it.
be close.
We ain't.
If we if
We
we
ain't
can't
gonna
get
see it.
Spence versus Crawford and they're closer, you know, I don't think so. Because Canelo also said he likes where he is, and he went up and he was like, that was fun, but I'm gonna stay where I'm at. I don't think he's going back down either. So I don't think he's gonna meet Spence in the 50s anywhere. I don't believe. So therefore, it would be Spence coming up to fight Canelo. Don't think that happened. You got Caleb Plant, which is, a tough fight. Billy Joe Saunders, which is, yeah. And then you got the Charlo brothers. Jamel, I think is the bigger one. Jamel Charlo. Don't quote me on that.
Don't quote me on. I ain't gonna quote you on that, man.
But
Not gonna quote you on that.
but that's a big fight. Could be bigger if Jamel fights, someone beforehand, gets a good, nice victory. But all the fights that we say for Canelo are at these lower weights. I don't think there's anybody.
There's not a actual fight that I think Canelo can actually be matched up with where it's like, ooh, I want to see that unless he goes down. But Who knows? Who knows? Who
Who
knows?
knows? You know,
Canelo versus who? That's a big question right there, man. Canelo versus who? Because Canelo is a damn good fighter, but I don't know if we see him against somebody that is at the same name wise caliber as he
now I'll
is.
say this before we move on. He has a very good idea. You know, he has. I'm not gonna say he has an Amanda Nunez idea, but it's that's where we heard it before earlier in the show. Is if I can't put together those big fights, then guess what I can do? Line
Beat
them up
everybody.
and knock them down. And listen, I'm not mad about being able to see Canelo 4 times in a year, as opposed to when Mayweather was on top. We got to see him what once,
Once every
maybe
year, once every
twice.
two
You
years.
know, maybe twice a year. That one time that it was an accident, he forgot to change the calendar date or something. You know, so eh, I'm not mad that I get to see him 4 times in a year. He might get in a little trouble. Maybe we don't know. We don't know.
I don't think he
I don't
will.
think he will either. But boxing, boxing is the best it's ever been, but it's also the worst it's ever been because
There's a
there's
lot
a
of
lot of big
like
fights,
there's a lot of big fights, but there's a lot of trash out there too.
lot of big fights, and there's a lot of money being shoveled into that too. Because think about this: the purse bid with Teofimo Lopez. That's that's pretty good. You know, I I, I, I don't know why I thought that number was going to be higher. Who was it? Thriller, the guys that put on the uh Mike Tyson fight. They
Yeah, I
won
think
the
so.
bid. I think it was for like 6 million. Thought that number might have been higher, but
I think
if
it was
if
low.
that if if that was 6 million was the number, I'm like, what was he offered by his own promotion? And then
Mm.
we got all these big guys, but no one's fighting each other. I don't know. I don't.
Man, it's a lot of talk out there, man, but it's no action.
No action. All talk, no action.